Hello and welcome to this episode of India and the World. I'm Nidhi Razdan and you're watching DeKoder. Well, the Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, and President Trump of the United States finally came face to face in Europe for the first time actually since February of 2025. So it's been a really long gap, almost a year and a half, and it has been quite an eventful year in India US ties. We've seen the relationship actually decline quite rapidly, facing a lot of stresses and strains along the way. And while there's been some attempt to repair that as well, we're not quite out of the woods yet. And perhaps when you looked at that meeting between the US president and the Indian prime minister, some of those tensions, that awkwardness was very much on display there as well. For instance, when the US president was asked about whether he would offer condolences for the deaths of three Indian seafarers at the hands of the US Navy recently, he didn't. The way he spoke about coming to India's defense only if Mr. Modi was its leader was another rather strange remark to have made. The body language between the two also not quite what it used to be. Mr. Modi is known for his effusive hugs with world leaders. That wasn't the case this time. So even though there were a lot of positive things that were said outwardly, is there more than meets the eye? And does India need to recalibrate its relationship with Washington? We look at some of those questions today, along with the fact that all of this happened on a day when details of the memorandum of understanding between Iran and the United States have become public. And by and large, the consensus seems to be that the US has given a lot more to Iran than many had expected, that Iran may have walked away as the winner here. And there are a number of concessions that Washington and that Trump has made despite talking of an unconditional surrender once upon a time. We have two distinguished diplomats joining us on the program today to take us through this. Ambassador K.C. Singh is here in Delhi, and Ambassador Dan Fried is joining us from Washington D.C. Thank you both very much for being with us. Ambassador K.C. Singh, to you first on the India-US relationship in particular. What did you make of the Trump-Modi meeting at the end of the day?
Look, the last few weeks, the public reaction here, the media, generally pressure was being put on the government and why are you not taking up with US the killing of the sailors? So there was definitely a visible problem which was visible between India and US. The CDA was called in, uh, but that was just not good enough. People said it has to be taken up properly with the US government. I have a feeling that the US president had been briefed that this problem is there. You've been distracted by Iran. Pakistan is the other problem, the importance given to Pakistan. And then, of course, he's been to China. And, he didn't even mention Taiwan there. He didn't want to get into that subject. So he's looking at the world differently. Till now, the Indo US relations for the last, all through this century, from the beginning of the century, after the nuclear test disagreement was over, was basically based on an assumption that US considers India as critical to balancing China in Asia and the world generally. Now, with President Trump, that obviously is not so. I don't think, and that's why just before Prime Minister met President Trump, they took I out of the Pacific commands. Otherwise, the two commands had been combined, and the Pacific had been extended to the Indian Ocean. Now it is back again to the east coast of India.
Ambassador Fried, to just get your first thoughts on that. I mean, would you agree that the India US relationship is at a place at this point where a lot more work needs to be done to rebuild the trust that we've lost in the last year or so?
Well, Ambassador Singh is right. That is, ever since the US and India got past the problem of the Indian nuclear test, we have built the basis of an enduring strategic partnership. This remains in US interests. And the the problems you described in US India bilateral relations are fixable problems, and they are problems of, really, I hate to say this, but mostly the US is making. That is, pushing India on tariffs while not pushing China on tariffs for over its energy relations with Russia struck me as an incomplete or simply a wrong approach. I think failure to express condolences on the lives of the deaths of the Indian sailors was another forced error by the Americans. But I think that the strategic basis of good US India relations remains. So it shouldn't be that hard to get back to it. In that context, I welcomed the discussions between the Prime Minister and President Trump because that puts us back on track. US interests and, may I say, US values should steer us toward good relations with India.
But I think the question is, and I'll get Ambassador Casey Singh, back on this. Ambassador Casey Singh, I think the point is that do American and Indian values still align today? Is the Quad still relevant today for the Americans more than it is for India? And therefore, do we need to recalibrate our relationship with Washington, which has been so pro-Washington in the last many years?
Look, we'll have to, you can't readjust relations with the US simply because US has a president who is, dislocating the existing world order. Now, how long it lasts, will he be able to carry on with it after the November elections? If the Republicans do badly, will Netanyahu survive the elections in November? So I think the next 3, 4 months are very crucial. That will decide peace and war in West Asia. That'll decide where the rest of the world goes. The Chinese have also they put the US on the back foot, threatening to hold the rare earths, but at the same time, they're keeping an eye on them. Now, that leaves India somewhere in the middle because, and even yesterday, others noted, I didn't notice it, that while President Trump, either during the press conference or otherwise, was again talking of G2, which is President Xi Jinping coming to US. Now, if he's beginning to treat it as a G2, that's a nightmare for India because that's exactly what India never wanted. We are talking a multipolar world. We've talked about it for the last 2.5 decades. And now you have this, a new polarity developing in which you are now subordinate. You're not seen as equal with China. You're not even seen as aspiring to be China's rival. I don't see how President Trump's vision we can adjust to this kind of a vision. He is transactional. When he thinks that he should be nice to you because he wants the trade deal, he wants some other concessions, he wants $500 billion that you promised to invest in America, and so on and so forth. But equally suddenly, like at the end of his meeting yesterday with G7, all of a sudden, then he said, if Iran doesn't do it, then we will bomb them. So everyone was taken out. So with President Trump, you don't know where you are. So I think essentially you have to play, keeping this in mind that with President Trump, it's transactional. Being friendly with the Prime Minister is not something which is going to necessarily translate into policy changes or accommodation in as far as trade or investment or other elements are concerned. Take, for instance, his saying, which was really bizarre to say, as long as you are the leader, India will come to your rescue if somebody attacks you. Now, the only countries that India can have a problem with are Pakistan and China. Pakistan is his favorite now. Field Marshal Munir is his favorite general. And with China, you think he will come in if we have a problem with China? He's not even mentioning Taiwan. He's not even giving arms to them. That file is lying on his table. He's not even approved it. So if you're there, what exactly will he do for India? Yeah, he will rush in. He will rush in, but he'll rush in to settle what will be the ninth war. He again said the same thing. I've settled 8 wars in the presence of Indian Prime Minister. So it's a
Well,
difficult stance.
I thought that was a rather flippant, kind of a patronizing remark he seemed to be making about coming to India's defense. And also, you're not making it about the country, you're making it about an individual leader. And it was a bit odd that the Ministry of External Affairs didn't push back on that and sort of say that this is about countries. But anyway, we live in the world that we do. But, Ambassador Fried, I think the question is, I think, in a way, what Ambassador Casey Singh is trying to say is that maybe India needs to bide its time until the Trump era is over,
Mm,
and then sort of just kind of cautiously see how this plays out till he's in office and take it from there. And that's rather a sad position to be in.
right. Ambassador Casey Singh's frustration is completely understandable, and the examples he cites are unfortunately accurate. So the question is, what should India do? I share his concern about a G2. I think that is just nuts. I think that balance of power approaches, spheres of influence approaches, um, have never worked out terribly well. American strategy in the decades of our wisdom rejected spheres of influence. We believed in basically a free world model or a rules based model. I know that Indians will point out the hypocrisies and inconsistencies in US policy, but to the degree we actually followed that approach of a free world approach or a rules based approach, it worked out well for everybody. Now, going back to a spheres of influence approach is a problem. It is also true that the Trump administration will not last forever. It is further true, and the ambassador said this, and he's quite right, that the congressional elections in the US in November may lead to different things. So, what should India do? And that's what you were asking about. And I certainly think that India should be more present in Washington. I don't mean just officials, but I mean the foreign policy thinkers in India who are concerned about the things that Ambassador Singer is concerned about should show up in Washington and develop new channels of communication, new contacts with the Congress, with the think tanks, right, left, center. I think getting inside the Washington structures and participating in the U.S. debate because it is a, a strikingly polarized but also non-crystallized debate. A lot is up in the air. And in this, and the Trump administration itself is often inconsistent because it is a confederation of different schools of thought. Into the somewhat confused Washington foreign policy world, outside actors can try to find a place and move things. And I would welcome India participating in this process. When I'm in Europe, and I just got back from Poland yesterday, I urge the Europeans to come to Washington and work with the Americans. I'd make the same recommendation to the Indians. If India thinks the U.S. policy should emphasize more support for Taiwan, I am in agreement. If India thinks that the Indo-Pacific Quad is a good thing, come to Washington and make that case. I think that the majority of Republicans in Congress and certainly an overwhelming majority of Democrats will be sympathetic to those points of view. So I think building, let's say, partners in strategic thought in Washington is a good investment. And rather than simply express frustration with the Trump administration, which I thoroughly understand, I would say, get here and get inside Washington and push. And there are many Americans who would be sympathetic, including where I work at the Atlantic Council.
I think that's very interesting what you said, and unfortunately, the government of India doesn't express much when it comes to the Trump administration, at least publicly, which is I think part of the problem. I mean, in terms of the way public opinion is now looking at this relationship here. But I do get
Oh,
your
but I'm
point.
not critical. I'm not critical of the Indian government. I have the greatest sympathy for any government trying to find the right tactics for dealing with the Trump administration. Believe me.
I can see that. Just turning to the MOU between Iran and the United States, Ambassador Singh, I just wanted your take on this first. You know the region well. You've served there as ambassador. What's the, as we say in Hindi, mota mota headline for you? That Iran's got a lot more out of this than the Americans?
I think more than the 14 points in the MOU, President Trump answering questions added to it. And I think it became very clear he was conceding almost everything which the Iranians wanted. Uh, Now, he said they will never have a nuclear bomb, but that's what uh, you know uh, uh, the former supreme leader had already instructed. Those were his instructions. that Iran shall not acquire a nuclear device. And he was assassinated on the first day, on February 28th. Now you're going and saying they're giving me a commitment, but that's a commitment that, Khamenei had told his government that they will not acquire a weapon. And then, of course, now the debate is, was the agreement that President Obama reached better than the one which has been reached now? Of course, President Trump has been running that down and saying all of things. You see, the crucial thing was the sunset clause in that agreement. Uh, from about 31, uh, Iran would be allowed to do what they want. The agreement may say that, but Iran was still signatory to NPT. You had the additional protocol. IAEA was supervising what was happening there. And the enrichment had not been increased beyond the 3 point some percent while the JCPOA was there. After President Trump withdrew, that's when the Iranians went their own way. So, therefore, to say now that I've got a concession from them was very much there even earlier. But anyway, leaving that aside, he said two, three other things. He has said, well, why shouldn't Iranians have missiles if the others have them? Now,
The
that takes
Saudis do
care of
have.
one of the issues,
Yeah.
because Israel and all have been saying just finish all their missiles. Now, they realize they can't do it because this time what Iran has demonstrated, they stored their missiles in tunnels inside the mountains. You can bomb them, you can't reach them. And that's what happened. And that's why Iran continued to strike back. Secondly, he said, well, nuclear enrichment to the extent you need it for power and electricity is understandable. Well, that's what Iran has been saying. They said under the NPT, supervised by the IAEA, we should be allowed to continue enriching or running nuclear reactors. Now, of course, you have to limit it and supervise it. Because what Iran had started doing is putting some of their new facilities underground or in tunnels. They have to stop that. They can't do it. But President Trump is already sort of, and then comes the Hormuz Strait. 60 days, there are not going to be any charges. But after that, they said, no, we will not call it tariff. We will call it, fees for handling it. So what they have said that between Oman and Iran, they will decide how they're going to run it. And also they do mention in the agreement, in the MOU, in consultation with other countries, which means will they be talking to UAE and Saudi Arabia? We don't know because UAE is so much isolated in the Gulf at the moment. And if you notice, even yesterday, although Mohammed bin Zayed was invited for the G7, the Saudis were not. And to that extent, those who have signed the accords with Israel, those are the countries which have got isolated. And Pakistani Prime Minister also, when he issued the first statement that the agreement is coming, he thanked Turkey, he thanked Qatar, he thanked Saudi Arabia. He didn't mention Bahrain or UAE. So,
Absolutely.
it's a different world. It's a fragmented GCC. The attack on Iran has fragmented the GCC. It has improved the situation of Iran. It's given Iran an additional element in their hand, which is the Strait, to exert pressure on the entire world and particularly the US. They didn't have this
Absolutely.
deterrence
Nobody,
element, so
nobody
they've
had
got
to
the deterrence.
nobody had to pay for their tankers going through the Strait of Hormuz, and that possibility is now very much there. And therefore, Ambassador Freed, uh, what did this war actually achieve for Trump, and how is the U.S. media reacting to this agreement? What are you seeing there? Because none of the stated objectives, and there were many, it went from regime change to something else and so on. None of those objectives have actually been achieved. So, what was the point?
This war has achieved little for the United States. Iran has been weakened militarily and economically, but it has gained a measure of control or is likely to gain a measure of control over the Strait of Hormuz, which is something it didn't have before. The nuclear negotiations go back to where they were before February 28th. So, arguably, the United States is somewhat worse off than we were. Now, the question is, what is a longer term sustainable US strategy toward Iran? And it will have to be a strategy of negotiations on the nuclear side and some sort of limitation of the nuclear program. But that's not going to be sufficient. According to the 14-point MOU, there will be no restrictions other than a general ceasefire on Iranian support for its proxies in the region, which means the United States is going to continue to have a longer-term problem of Iran. To deal with that longer-term problem, it is going to have to find allies and rebuild trust in the region, because we can't handle this enough. The wisest people in the Trump administration and in Trump world, if I can put it that way, understand that the United States cannot handle all its challenges without allies. So if I were in the government and looking to recraft a sustainable longer-term Iran strategy, one of my points would be start consulting with India, because we need all the friends we can get, and we need to have a longer-term policy of support of containment of Iran, which is easier said than done, limitations on its nuclear program, sort of like arms control with the old Soviet Union, and I think a sustainable way to support Iranian civil society, which is the great strategic weakness of the Iranian regime. Most Iranians don't like it. It rules by force, it rules by fear. And the US, by going to war with Iran, seems to have squandered, at least temporarily, this enormous strategic asset. We need to be less impatient, less unilateral, and more determined. And in the end, there are options for the U.S. to have a more sustainable, more successful Iran strategy. But of course, Ambassador Singh, and you are correct, the U.S. has gained little from this war. We are somewhat or a lot worse off than we were. I think only somewhat worse off.
I think that sums it up pretty well. And the next few months will be something that everyone will watch closely. Whether I don't think anyone's going to reach an agreement on Iran's nuclear program in 60 days. We'll probably see this drag on for a very long time. But what happens to the Strait of Hormuz in the meantime? Will we actually end up paying more for fuel? I think those are big concerns that regular folks do have everywhere around the world. Thank you very much to both of you for joining us, Ambassador Casey Singh, Ambassador Freed.
Thank you.
And it was a
Thanks
pleasure
for
to
having
speak
me.
to you. We'll be back with much more on India and the world next week. Do join us then. Goodbye.